Welcome. Tonight we complete the trio of the Dots, Lines, and Destinations podcast. International Aviation Man of Mystery, Fozz Mahmud.
That's quite the setup.
Someday I'll get your elusive show producer too, but I think for on-air purposes, we're completing the set, and
we can't even find our show producer.
And it's a delightful aviation themed podcast. I've got the links in the show notes, and one thing that strikes me is of the host, of course, Seth needs to be interrupted to get a word in, and he's gotten better at letting people speak. And Stephen is talkative. You pause, you wait, and then as I describe it, you lower the boom with some incredibly obtuse aviation knowledge or insightful industry comment. I'm wondering, first, you've never actually worked in the aviation industry, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So how do you build up this store of knowledge, and then we'll get into why no aviation industry employer has poached you?
Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. When I get interested in something, I will just learn as much as I can about it, and just keep going to the bottom of the realms of the depths of the earth, or whatever it may be, finding out whatever I can. And I happen to be fortunate with a very good memory, so stuff just gets stuck in the back of my memory. Some random facts, as I'm sure you've heard on the podcast, and I can just somehow manage to pull them out. Not always, but sometimes I can.
And that's good, as it's a very detail-oriented, nitpicky hobby and audience, where they're like, what was a recent incident where out of the blue something came up about union disputes, and then you had something going back 15 years with Northwest, a group of Northwest mechanics, and immediately readers were writing in saying, oh, you didn't get it exactly right.
Yeah, there's some flack we got for that, but it is 15 years ago. I'm not going to remember all the details. But I did catch Seth. That was the best part of that, where Seth's like, they did? And he went and fact checked it. He goes, wow, they did.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen often.
And what exactly? So we're referring to a union being dismissed, essentially, from U.S. airline?
We were actually talking about, has an airline ever broken a union? I think that was the premise of the conversation. And there was an incident, I think about 16 years ago, where Northwest, one of their ground crew, and I don't think it was mechanics, it was some other group. They basically went on strike, and Northwest ended up replacing them over, and I don't remember the details of how they replaced them, but they in essence broke the union in that case.
So not the cuddly Northwest of broken planes, but happy memories for me of my first flights to Asia. What got you into aviation then?
I don't know. I really, it started. The irony is, when I was a kid, I couldn't fly. I used to be scared of flying. I would vomit every time I flew. So flying was a very rare thing for me. And then sometime in the 90s, I went on a trip with a buddy of mine to California to visit some of our other friends who had moved out there. And just had a good time. Went back a few months later, and just started traveling a little more, mostly to California. And this is when I lived in New Jersey, so just cross country. And then in 99, I actually moved to San Diego. And so moving to San Diego, I had found myself going back and forth across the country a fair bit, just to visit family and friends. But also, my job at the time was requiring me to travel a fair bit in the Southwest. So I found myself on a plane a fair bit. But it's actually funny, because I was just looking through some of my flight diary logs. First year I had elite status was 95 with my United Premier status. Not 95, 97. And really, that was about all I had. In 99, I actually got platinum on Continental for the first time. But really, it wasn't until 2006 where I actually really started my the bulk of my international flying. And up until 2006, I think I'd taken 5 trips out of the country. Now it's been hundreds, and I have no idea how many.
Wow! So that is just piecing together as the various times I've seen you. You're one that if you come to a happy hour and event, you slip out way before it's overstaying the the party's fun. So I know these little bits from listening to you for years and these chance meetings, but I've heard so much about your frequent trips to London, and I assumed that was something from your childhood on to today. But I guess the international really is a more recent part of your profession, your fun, and your family.
Yeah, really, in the last 14 years, and even then, when the first couple of years I did it, it was like, 1 or 2 trips outside of the country a year. I think in the last 6 or 7, it's probably like 24 trips out of the country a year. Nothing like you.
Yeah. I fly to get to the destination, not to fly. So I'm always. Well, you mentioned the flight diaries thing, and that's one of my regrets because I never kept records, and I've got lots of old boarding passes that I didn't know just fade away into blank sheets of paper, depending on how they were printed. They were on those little strips. So I've got emails, different things, but I've seen these tools. I'm curious to hear your tools, your flight diary, as you said, and is there any hope for someone that's been traveling for a decade or two to somehow reconstruct these, or should they just throw up their hands and give up if they've not been keeping records?
It depends on how dedicated you are. So, I probably within the last year started keeping much better detailed records. Prior to that, all I really had was frequent flyer statements. And so, back before pre-merger United disappeared, I forget what they called it, but you could actually call them up and say, I want a lifetime summary of all my flights. Oh. They'd print it out, send it to you, and you have a history of all the flights you've taken with them. And then you can rebuild some of that. Continental, fortunately, had when they introduced the Million Miler program, they were actually able to put all the data in there. So, I mean, coincidental. So, back before Continental launched their Million Miler program, they had an interest in doing it, but they couldn't simply because they didn't have the historical data. Because they had just purged it off thinking they'd never need it. Well, their IT vendor happened to one day say, well, we do have some of this old data sitting here. Is this useful to you guys? And that kind of opened the door for them to say, they looked at it and said, this is exactly what we need. And then they were able to actually pull all that data in and then launch the Million Miler program. But that was one of the reasons why for the longest time they wouldn't launch one when people were asking, because they simply didn't have the data to.
Huh. You have an IT background, and I'll pry out of you what exactly you do. But for the moment, we'll say that data nowadays would be treated like gold. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was treated as disposable.
Exactly. So, I mean, for rebuilding my history, right, it's been a number of different things, which was taking the frequent flyer statements that I had, and that gives you origin, destination, flight number. I tend to go really overboard, so I can't go all the way back for some of the data, but I do like to go all the way down to departure runway and arrival runway as something I track. So you can, once you have the flight in the origin, destination, the flight number, and the date, you can actually go to the BTS site, the U.S. government site, and actually, for the last 20-something years, go through, pull all the data for time out of there.
Wow.
And actually tail number for a lot of it. So I've done that for a fair bit of it. So, I have not done all of it. So I initially, years ago, started with flight memory. Flight memory was a great thing when it started 15 years ago, 16 years ago, 14 years ago, but they just never really maintained it. It got really stale. I then transitioned to open flights a little bit, and open flights is nice. I just didn't, the interface never completely warmed up to me. And then when Flight Diary came out, it looked pretty nifty. But there's no easy way to get data from one to the other. So the open flights was cool enough where they built an interface where if you saved your flight memory pages, you could import them in, and it would pretty much do a reasonable job. Flight Diary allegedly had an interface to pull open flights, but it would never pull it in clearly. So I literally, over the course of a year, would do one page of flights, manually put them in. Because what was happening is some of the missing data in open flights and flight memory was causing problems in Flight Diary.
What?
So I finally got all that in, and now I just have to go back and populate the time information and some of the tail numbers and stuff. Just it's when I have time, I'll do it. It's a mind-numbing activity, so it's like when I'm exhausted, when I don't want to think about it, it's just a repetitive thing I can stick my head into.
What does the entering the runway tell you, or mean to you, I should say?
It's really more of your curiosity. It's like, how many times have I done it really came out to one day I was like, how many times have I done this approach at this point? Like San Diego, right? When I lived in San Diego, you pretty much always came into 2.7 or took off from 2.7, but every once in a while you'd go in or out of 9. Very rare, but I'm not sure why I do it. I don't know what's use it'll serve down the way, but it's a point of data that I can collect that I wouldn't be able to go back and populate because that's not really documented anywhere.
Oh, I see. And, yeah, I know you. I learned what the dots and lines concept was, but now I realize it extends to the runways as well.
It's a little bit of insanity. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, the overlap is, I think, both the aviation geeks as well as the country collectors hope for some kind of diversion to Midway Atoll that is not that is necessary, but does not put anyone in jeopardy and causes no harm to anyone. But we both perk up when there's a report of one of these diversions. There, oh, geez, if we could just.
Well, having been stuck in the South Pacific, I don't know if that's something I wanted to repeat.
I am booked ostensibly for next September, September 2021, for a Midway Atoll trip, a scheduled charter. It was pushed a year back because of rat eradication. I have no idea, of course, how it'll play out with the COVID situation. But CJ Johnson in the comments, he mentions he misses Continental, and I flew them just a handful of times. My first time actually was the Island Hopper, and I think the only other time I flew them was some like 2008 or 9, a business trip where it was like a Buffalo to Atlanta or some kind of flight that it was the cheapest thing the company could book. And so I enjoyed it fine. The Island Hopper was special because of the route, but I don't have any memory or connection with Continental. What is there to miss about it? What was lost when the United gobbled them up?
I think the thing that I missed about Continental the most was it operated like a small business. So the interaction you got, and particularly a large portion of my time flying Continental was when I was in San Diego. It was an outstation, but the staff knew me. Like, there would be times when my flight would be delayed, and they would call me at my office saying, "Your flight's delayed. You've got 4 hours. Take your time. Don't worry about it." That kind of service. But you always just felt like it was a small business. Like when you're talking to an agent, when you're talking to people at headquarters, United is a machine. I don't really have much bad stuff to say about United other than it's gotten very caught up in its own bureaucracy. And that's the part that I miss, is getting to someone who can make a decision at United about anything or understand something is much harder than it ever was at Continental.
Yeah, my United flying started around 2013 or so, when we moved over to Jersey City, and it was just as easy to get to Newark as it was any of the JFK LaGuardia options. And I started business travel, and I was all the United statuses other than global services. I was 1K, I was platinum, gold. Maybe now I'm silver because of Marriott status. And it felt like a few years ago they stopped trying to cater towards their supposed elite flyers. And part of that, I guess, was Newark, where every flight I got on, there were like 30 pharma executives that were all global services that were ahead of me on the upgrade list. So in 1 year as a 1K, I got 2 upgrades the entire year. It was midweek, mid-January to Jamaica, and like one Austin to Houston connection or something. But it
Austin to Houston is a hard upgrade, so you should pat yourself on the back for that.
Well, it was also like, I forget what it was, like the day of the week, least like Wednesday morning, like the least possible chance of a business traveler getting on the flight or something like that. But but it just I got to the point that when I moved to Seattle, they had already devalue, but I felt it was the sweet spot, that the platinum, the free award changes has always been the biggest thing for me. My travel goals around getting around the world spontaneously, needing to change things, that free award changes was the big benefit. And when they started putting all those cuts into that and adding these 30-day, 60-day, it felt like the program was irrelevant to me, and so I just dropped it. I didn't stay on that hamster wheel. I stayed on the Delta one because they kept it. But you've plowed on. You're on your way towards. Is it so lay out the lifetime stat? I want you to have the glory of laying out what it takes and how much harder it is in the past decade than say the Continental days to earn this status.
So at the moment, I am, I think, at 3.4 and change million miles. So I've passed the lifetime 1K mark, which I did 3 years ago, I think, almost. The next step is lifetime global services, and the last million is the hardest. There's no doubt about that. And it's funny, like I was reasonably doing about 150 to 200K a year over the last 2 years. This year clearly has shot that out of the window. And I don't know if I really want to go back to that pace. I've actually kind of found the last few months to be refreshing in some ways. So I'll get there.
I'm sure you will. It's and so it's how many of those million miles were at a time when partner flights were counting, and how many are when it's just truly United? It's flown miles, right? It's not even the class of service bonus. Or?
So now it is truly just button seat miles on United only. And that's one of the things that makes it very hard. At the time the programs merged, I want to say I was at 2.1 or 2.2 million. And so historically, pre-merger, Continental would count anything, any EQMs, be it partner EQMs, be it bonus EQMs for fare bonuses, all that counted. United historically was always very stingy, where they only counted button seat. But when they merged the programs, they uplifted the United ones to include partner flights and class of service bonuses. So after that, I ended up at 2.2. The reality is, like, a lot of people complain that it's so hard that it's not fair that they only include United Metal and what have you. But I come back and counter, they're the only airline that will give you top tier.
Yeah.
You on a million mile. You can't get. I don't think Delta will do platinum. I know they definitely won't do diamond, right? American doesn't do.
Delta's it's like the old Continental system, and I'll actually buy credit because credit card have different boosts depending on hitting spend thresholds. I'll cross my 2 million this year without getting on another flight, as I'm not likely to fly again this year, but I'm just short of 2 million, and so that's the gold. So silver is 1 million. That's almost useless. One time, a gate agent in Minneapolis, I saw some young, maybe 21, 2-year-old young woman, business trip, came up. She goes, "I just qualified for silver. What do I get?" And it was this very seasoned, Minneapolis gate agent, or ex-Northwest, and she said, "It's really more of a teaser, honey."
So true. It's so true.
So the gold has some value. The alliance benefits, whatever the future of the alliance is. I think I'll ask you about that, and the same day changes in that, and some shot at upgrades, but it doesn't have the benefits of platinum, which is a free award changes that, and that's all the way at 4 million. So it's much easier to earn with all these different sources, partner flights, different credit card bonuses, but you tap out at platinum. I've not even heard of anybody being, even like politicians, I don't think there's cases where they've just outright given a lifetime diamond. They've given complimentary diamond at times. And then the 360 status is, I had 1 year with business travel, I was over like 35,000 spend and never even got it then. It's very elusive, and it seems to be towards very frequent, very short distance, expensive flights, like some of your business travels over the years have been, rather than I was a long haul international, fairly pricey tickets for that particular year.
I don't know the details around it, but generally what the way those work out is cost per mile. right? Revenue per mile, right? So you could buy a ticket to Tokyo if you spend $15,000, right? That'll help you qualify because your revenue per mile is much higher than a $300 ticket to Columbus.
And you mentioned lifetime status. Now, United is the one that I really tried to rationalize. So tell us about the 1 million miler level and what you get for gold, because in my head, the airline lifetime statuses I'm aware of that seem potentially worth chasing is United 1 million, Delta maybe 2 million, and BA Gold. I've heard good things, but others are not on my radar at all.
I mean, BA Gold is definitely a good program. United, the nice thing is the entry level is not the lowest level of the elite chain, right? At 1 million, you come into gold. So you get Star Gold, which for Star Alliance, that means you get lounge access on international, or if you're in domestic in a place where there's a Star Alliance lounge that's not a United lounge, you can use it. So like in Dallas, you can use the Lufthansa lounge or the Turkish lounge. And that's really kind of unique that they bring you in at the second tier at the first 1 million level. I mean, you've got upgrades, you've got reduced same day change fees. The upgrades are hit or miss. I mean, even as a 1K, upgrades are hit or miss. So I personally don't view upgrades as a benefit anymore. I just think if you get an upgrade, you're lucky, but it's not something I would ever count on.
And they're selling it to the other guy, the non-status, for $29, right? It's
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of algebra that goes behind what it's being sold at, and often, as it's been explained to me, right, I might be on a $300 ticket and I have a $400 buy-up offer. That guy might be on an $1,100 ticket and has a $29 buy-up offer, and it's really because they're normalizing the total price paid. Still, but the reality is the perception of it is what's off, and that's what the airlines don't seem to understand. Right?
So how do you know that? So that's the kind of thing when I hear you guys talking. How do you know the algebra behind it and how that's working?
Partially because from back in the day when Continental used to have flyer talk to's, I befriended some of the folks that worked at Continental, who then went to United and then have since moved on to other airlines. But in just talking to them, they would share some of the insight of what's actually going on, because that's what I go back to when I say you had a much easier way to get to someone who knew something at the airline, right? You at Continental, Scott O'Leary and Shannon Kelly, two people who most of us met through the dues, very easy to talk to. And if I ever had something, I'd go to Scott and I say, I've got this issue or whatever. He'd either pass me on to the right person or he'd come back to me himself, either get details or tell me what I need to know. And it's just, good old fashioned networking in that regards.
I'm trying to think. I mean, as a occasional blogger, it's just the whole thing is how to get a relationship that's not the PR person, because you just cannot get you'll get no expertise and no accuracy if you're just
it's hard. I mean, legitimately, right? It's not like in the case of Scott, it wasn't just that I just pick up the phone or what have you and just start talking to him. There were legitimate issues that I would find, and the running joke at one point became, if there was an issue, I would somehow find it. But as an example, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, I noticed a pattern where upgrades weren't clear. Like inventory's all there, the system runs doesn't, and Scott and I went back and forth, and they started digging into it, and he came back and said, something about you breaks the chain. And he goes, soon as it'll start processing upgrades, soon as it gets to you, everybody else gets to reject it. And it took them a while to figure that out, but it was just stuff like that. And so that kind of stuff actually has helped build some credibility to the interactions I have.
It's incredible to even think that these companies would have those one-on-ones, the relationships these days, where it's in terms of the frequent flyer programs, they've been taken over by ex-McKinsey or Wall Street financial engineers more than anybody who has a sense of travel or the programs.
And that's one of the problems with the programs, right? They've really lost connection with the audience, right? They're looking at it strictly from a financial perspective. It's just like the buy-up upgrades, right? they don't pay attention to the optics or the perception. They're just looking at the numbers. And so at the end of the day, right, perception is what drives a customer's experience. Whether it's true or not, that customer's perception is their reality, right? And this is one of the things that I think the airlines could do a better job at communicating. Well, this is why this worked out, or this is how we calculated it, right? If you see a buy-up offer and saying this is how we calculated it, you might not understand it, but you're less likely to question it.
Yeah, the example that comes to my mind is and I don't even put the luggage tags on my luggage. There's a couple of years I admit I did it, and then I got tired of the look. But when Delta rolled out the diamond status, I had it from the beginning, and I was an aggrieved, forced Delta flyer from the merger at Northwest. But they rolled these out, and I thought, oh, these diamond tags, they look really cool. They're metal, all of this. And this was 2012. And the first time I was commuting to Atlanta, I see in Atlanta airport all these tags that look like diamond. But geez, I mean, I know there's a lot of flyers, but it shouldn't be this many. And then I looked, and they were the silver tags, which were plastic, but looked almost the same in color and design. Oh. And then I thought, and I didn't. Again, I wasn't even a big bag tag person, but I just looked at it and said, that's partly why I'm not going to use it, because I'm suddenly turned into a snob for no reason, just because they look too much like the silver, and I don't want to look like the silver. The platinum look better, and to this day, this is 8 years later, they still make them look so similar.
Well, I mean, my other favorite about bag tags is, right, in Newark or Houston are probably the most guilty of these. Walking through randomly, you'll see someone with a elite bag tag from 2002.
Oh yeah.
And I really just want to go up there and rip it off.
Yeah.
Like, it's been a while. You might want to take it off.
There might be somebody in my family that's been guilty of that, but the numbers aren't on there on the diamond one, and they don't even put the year anymore. So it just blends in.
And that's not so bad, but like, you're using the old company name, which doesn't exist anymore, and it clearly has the year. I mean, it's not like you're going to look current.
Yeah, but at a certain point, I've seen people like with those flying Colonel Delta tags or whatever that go back to the 80s, and I think there's a certain point, if you wait enough decades, you're back in fashion.
That is true. It will not. There's definitely some old tags that I wish I had kept as well.
You mentioned getting stuck in the Pacific, and since 1 out of 10 DLD episodes revisits this incident, I'll just tell people to pick any segment of the archives. But this was the Micronesia Island hopper, and many of us in EPS are familiar with it because we're actually trying to get to these islands. But I'm curious about, say, a few years ago, what United cut some of the service, and suddenly all the Filipinos working on YAP couldn't get home because they had to go through Guam, and they didn't have permission to transit Guam for a few months. And so on a macro scale, all of these obscure routes and very limited service destinations where there's real people in these territories, what's happening the past few months is, I sit in Seattle, I'm like, oh, fewer planes are flying overhead, but if I had permission to go somewhere, I could figure it out. But other places, what are you seeing with all your tentacles in industry news?
I mean, there's definitely been a reduction in the at least with the island hopper, but they haven't dropped it altogether. But it has to be hard for some of these islands. I can't even imagine how life would be. I mean, when we did the island hopper, I mean, the short story is we got stuck on the military base, the second stop in. But when you go to the other islands, like there was a couple who started with us in Honolulu, who was going to either, I don't remember, the third or fourth stop, the fourth stop, and they had been trying to do this for 3 days, I think, and their flight kept getting canceled out of Honolulu. So they finally made it with us. When we get to Kwajalein, this happens, and they were just trying to go on a nice diving trip.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, when we left Kwajalein, and I can't even remember the order of the island, but we got to the next destination, and anyone who's going to the fourth or fifth island was told to get off and wait till the morning in the terminal till the next plane came. It's literally like a bus. And this poor couple, right? It's an elderly couple. They had to have to go stay in the terminal. And what was weird is, we came into this island at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, pitch dark. All you see is the beacon light and runway lights. I'm like, where do people go? You wouldn't even know where to go.
Yeah,
So
there's not like the team of taxis waiting for the inadvertent tourist showing up.
No, and I'm thinking, back then it didn't exist, but even now, I don't think there's an Uber or a Lyft out there.
Yeah. I think is that Chuk that was the next stop? I have to look at the
was it Ponape?
Oh, Kosrae then. It'd be Kosrae.
It was Kosrae, and then Ponape's after Kosrae.
Yeah, I think so. And that one is really small. So it they're really there. I mean, there's not much accommodation, even if you're booking it out way in advance.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't have a lot of options. So, but and honestly, I haven't paid a lot of attention to what's been going on with the Island Hopper, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were running cargo flights. Because it is the lifeline of a lot of these islands to get stuff in and out, especially with things like testing and stuff. You can't really put that on a ship and wait 3 weeks to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they were down to two a week from their. Normally, I think it's 3 a week. Sometimes it's 4, but I think they were down to 2 a week for the last few months.
Have you decided to just not pay attention to aviation these days? And we were talking before that it's the first time both of us had almost forgotten what it feels like to be jet lagged. Do you still keep the interest up?
I do, but there's not a lot of activity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's every day you can read about all the flights that have been delayed even further than their scheduled resumption date. Mm-hmm. Right? The last week in October is when the IATA winter season starts, and 2 months ago everything was starting back up, and at the end of October now you start seeing stuff slipping more and more and more. It's kind of depressing. And like every ticket that I have bought in the last 9 months has gotten canceled. So, like, I have a trip to Singapore scheduled for October. I have no idea if I'll go, right? And not because I don't want to. It's whether or not the flights will go.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I can get in.
And you do seem to be the king of irregular operations, delaying and diverting flights even in normal times. I've always wondered why you keep flying when every flight, it seems, has a story of a United gate agent in San Francisco preventing you from boarding, or the ticket not honored, and you're negotiating on conference call with SAS agents in Stockholm with somebody at United in Chicago, or any of these kind of things.
I forgot about that one.
Keep at it.
Well, honestly, I think it's a numbers game, right? So overall, there will always be problems, and sure, I see a larger number of problems, but I also take a lot more flights than the average people. But part of it, part of it is like being in Newark. Flying in and out of Newark is black magic. And it's really like I've learned over time that I will always plan to go the night before, especially if I have to go for a business thing. I will not try to fly the morning off. I will always fly the night before, because I would rather be delayed and get to where I need to be than trying to do a 5 a.m. flight, have something go sideways, and then be stuck. Coming back, same thing. I don't fly, and just the opposite, actually. Coming back, I don't fly in the evenings. I always fly in the morning, because in the evening is when everything starts getting backed up and canceled. In the morning, you'll get in. So as much as I'm not a morning person, when I'm coming home, I would consider taking a 6 or 7 a.m. flight. Just because I know I'll get on the plane, I'll take a nap, I'll get off on time, if not sooner.
The LD in the comments is saying, do you still have your BMI gold tags going back? That's the Gary Left question.
I might actually have them somewhere, but they are not on any of my bags. I did find my BMI Gold card the other day while I was cleaning something out.
That leads me to thinking about Britain. So you go to London a lot for it sounds like family reasons. Rolls-Royce engines. Where are we? What's the take?
Rolls-Royce, I think the best Rolls-Royce engine ever made was the RB211. I think after that, they have overextended themselves. Every engine they've put out has had some sort of design flaw, which really makes you wonder why people are going back to them. And the Trent 9000s on the 350s, is that I don't remember the number, but the Trents for the 350s were doing well, and now a few weeks ago they identified some flaws with them as well. And I just like in Airbus, right? They have a lot riding on it in that when they did the 350, they opted to go with a single engine manufacturer. So if there really is a true flaw with the 350 Rolls-Royce engines, that could impact the entire worldwide fleet. But the question that I ask is like, what I don't understand from an airline perspective is why would you keep going, knowing that they've had this history? Why would you keep going back and buying the same engine?
And an engine costs so much. This is what, tens of millions for an engine?
Yes. They're not cheap. They're the most expensive component on the plane, right? And normally you're buying at least two for the plane, and depending on how many planes you're buying some spares as well. So it's a sizable expense, but the only reason I can think of is they're getting some really good discounts. But Rolls-Royce has clearly been in fiscal trouble with the 787 fallout. If there really is an issue with the 350 engines, that could like put them at even greater risk.
And I have no expertise in this area. I took the Boeing tour once because now I live in Seattle with my father, and what struck me of that progression is they take you up in the rafters, so to speak, and you start with the 747 line, and there's grizzled men and women in their 50s, 60s on their backs with a bunch of wrenches and nuts and all this stuff building these things. And by the time you reach the end of the tour, you've got a Lego assembly line of the 787 and a lot of very young people with 2 and 3 monitor setups behind screens. And it's a striking contrast. And I just observing that, it seems like in all that transition and the new technology that it allows, it seems like those grizzled people should have been carried along in some way towards what's happening there. But maybe that's just a casual observer, doesn't understand the progression of things.
Well, I mean, but there's the counterpoint to that, right? You've got someone who's mastered their craft. Do you want to pull them out of that to do a new craft? Right? Because if you pull the guy from the 747 line to move along to the 78s, who's going to build the 747?
I guess I meant in the sense that there were none of those type of people that seemed like they had a mechanical, in a physical sense. Everybody was sitting behind a screen by the end. And there didn't seem to be anybody with a wrench or something. And maybe that's not necessary, but it just, when I start reading about, again, I don't have any expertise on this stuff, but the MAX issues, I hear about, you talk about the Rolls-Royce. It just seems like if everything is on a computer design, there's something that's disconnected from going back to the grizzled veterans on their back that are screwing something in and really, really seeing it from the bottom up.
Well, I mean, you raise a good point, right? One of the drawbacks of technology is it disconnects us with the things that we're working on, so you no longer have a feel for it. And there's something to be said about the feel, right? If you ever talk to a true craftsman, they use their sense of touch to understand that object and what it needs, right? Take an aircraft engine, right? You would have someone running their finger across a blade. Now you've got equipment that allegedly does just as good a thing, but there's that sixth sense that equipment doesn't have that a human might. And you just wonder, like, but you see this across technology everywhere, right? It just forces us to become more disconnected with the world we live in. We just recorded an episode earlier tonight, and there's a thing in the Faroe Islands where you can remotely explore the island with someone with a local, right? You can experience it with them wearing a camera, but now you've lost that sense of touch and the sense of smell, right? Is it really the same thing?
I was just thinking how you always, for Faroe, I don't think anybody manages to correctly estimate how windy that place is. So that was my thought. The local's not gonna look like they're being blown over into cartwheels by the wind. It's you when you show up there the first time. So yeah, but it's certainly a great, but yeah, it's also the patience. I mean, when I went to the Faroes, I took these what's it, Vestana, these bird cliffs, where you can take a little boat out and see the bird cliffs. And so it's just supposed to be an hour boat tour. And I was lucky. My flight was a little delayed, but I just raced there. They called from the airport, talking about that small touch. The rental car office called from the airport, said he's on his way. Don't leave. He's driving. He'll stay to the speed limit, but don't pull. I mean, they waited till the moment I pulled up. They were pulling out. They let me leap onto the boat. But we're going out, and it was, what mesmerized us was on the cliffs were teenagers doing this traditional shepherd thing, where in the older times when food was so scarce, they would put the sheep on the Atlantic, so the outward facing cliffs, on little patches of grass. And it's so steep and restricted that they would just stay in that place all summer and eat the grass around them. And then they would have to, in the fall, bring them back in. And because it's so steep that any sudden movement would startle them, and they would leap off into the Atlantic, and your sheep is gone. And so they said now it's more of a tradition for the young people to go up and practice this. And so we sat there, and it became this almost 2-hour boat tour, because the captain said he hadn't seen it for years. And he was just sitting watching this incredibly slow movement, where it was 8 or 9 of these young people slowly moving a little closer, different angles. The sheep would go a little here, finally, till they could get in. And like 30 minutes, they could get close enough to where they couldn't grab hold of the sheep and lower it down. And it was this incredibly slow moving, like kabuki would be the art form, maybe, or no, I guess no is the really slow one in Japan. And it mesmerized us all that we got an extra hour of the boat tour. But yeah, that you just couldn't, anything virtual, you wouldn't sit for 2 hours just watching this, very slowly inching towards a sheep that might jump a few hundred feet into the Atlantic.
Right. And like that, I always view as vacation as a way to disconnect, right? And that's a great example of being able to disconnect from your normal life and just immerse yourself in what you're experiencing. But if you're sitting on your couch and watching a TV or a screen, are you really disconnecting? Right. And I think that's the thing we forget about technology, is because of technology, it's so much harder to disconnect now.
The first 3 months of so from mid-March, almost went into April, May, sometime in June was the first time I watched TV during the period, because I was already stuck at home, and I was also looking at screens all day for business purposes, that I just said I'm just going to sit out on my balcony looking at the world go by instead of touching a screen. And I think that helped me a lot. Continuing
that's what you need.
Yeah. Continuing the UK London theme, there's lots of confusion about, there's reorganization and administration. We learned a little bit with Thomas Cook, and there's a lot of worries about Virgin Atlantic. And as an airline, they've done, I think, a very good job of communicating to customers. But what can we understand? A lot of people have miles that they had been saving for these ultimate redemptions, and a lot of U.S. customers are just totally confused about not being familiar with the UK system.
I mean, I have said it before, holding miles for the dream vacation is probably never a good idea anymore, not with the rate they devalue. It's hard to know, right? There's so much uncertainty right now. Virgin Atlantic's running a promo where they'll give you tier points on reward redemptions, but they have a different situation than, say, BA, because they haven't been flying for months, right? So they need to build some amount of confidence back with their customer base. And they probably want to write down some of the liability because they have so much debt at this point. I mean, it's so hard to know where anything is going to go. I think it's a day-by-day situation. I don't think anyone really knows how this is going to play out, or when we're going to be on the other side of this.
I think the one thing that's been certain to me is, all the times that the airlines say, "Oh, we made this enhancement or this improvement based on customer feedback." When things turned bad, they knew exactly the parts that customers actually wanted and actually hated, and they could pivot to do it that fast. So I feel like the both the onboard experience and the frequent flyer programs, I felt at events like Freddie Awards that these people like you and I go home at night and we're thinking about awards and flying, and they're thinking about whatever their hobbies are, gardening or that. But at this moment, they pivoted and instantly knew what we actually valued and cared about, and it's just interesting to see that they had that awareness and they could flip the lever in many cases. But for years, they pretended the most obtuse and ridiculous arguments.
It's all about revenue. It's all about cost, right? And that's really what it boils down to. You know, I can't think of a good example, but there might be something that customers want, but the cost of it's too high. But something shifts, right? So let's take a random feature, right? It would have cost too much to give it away before they changed earnings or status to be tied to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've attached spend to it, now you've only got high revenue people in that category. You can thus afford to give that away because it's going to be to fewer people, but also to more people that are more valuable to your company. Right? It's complex math that goes on behind the scenes of what's the cost of doing this, and what's the cost of not doing this, right? And what do we stand to lose? And I'm going to do something very amateur right now because I didn't realize I did this, but I need to go grab my charger. Because I didn't realize my laptop's almost dead. I'll be right back.
Next, we'll ask him about his career, his successful career in IT. And I hear him on the way back. One of the things that I've been curious, he was commenting about the revenue-based changes of tying status towards spend, and I've seen so many arguments about how does it incentivize the valuable travelers, or does it just incentivize the actual indifferent travelers that spend the money anyway and don't really care? And I do feel like there is some value that was lost in a mile was magical and is magical and still is to, say, Alaska Airlines customers, and killing the idea that the mile flown has this value. I mean, to the point where the United program, they said, I gave up status a couple years ago, and I haven't even bothered to try to learn this monstrosity of complexity that they've done. I'm supposed to be something of a self-styled expert in frequent flyer programs, and the United thing, I've just said it's just not even worth understanding at this point. It's so obtuse and so divorced from the flying that I would be at all likely to do, unless perhaps I went back to a corporate job where there was huge amounts of individual, very expensive tickets.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, right? The goal of the airlines is to put you. They really want people to redeem 25,000 miles to go to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, at the end of the day, it costs them the least.
Mm-hmm.
It helps them write off that liability, and to the person who flies once a year, it gives them they believe it gives them a lot of value. But to you and I, right, I think that's a horrible investment when the ticket's $400, right? Why would I burn 25,000 miles for $400? And I candidly have minimized my accrual of United miles.
Mm-hmm.
So, 8 months ago, Kirby was out there upset that people weren't spending as much on their credit card versus the Ultimate Rewards credit cards. And he raised a big stink, and he totally missed the point that, like, I shifted all my spend from my United card to my Sapphire card because the United miles have become so devalued. I see no point in keeping tons and tons of United miles, especially when I can convert them from Ultimate Rewards at any point. And this is the kind of disconnect we're seeing from these companies, and they don't see this is the backlash of them doing such massive devaluations, right? And here, the part of the thing that I struggle with is you're treating every person the same, right? So whether I've got 3 million miles, I've clearly been devoted to this airline, but a ticket on Lufthansa first class, as an example, is going to cost me the same thing as it would someone who's just been earning miles on a credit card. right? Never even flown on a United flight. And so the question is, who, from your business standpoint, who's more important to you? The person just getting the miles through someone buying them, the credit card company, or the person actually flying your product and keeping it in the air? And I don't think the airlines have mastered that balance yet.
Yeah, Delta 4 or 5 years ago had that, where they had the differential pricing by status, and even at the time, and between my extended family, parents and such, we had diamond, platinum, gold, and silver in the family, and I could pull them up, and if the silver or gold happened to have the low price, I would redeem from that account. But it was very clear how they did it, and they got rid of that, along with some very egregious policies like charging the round trip price for one ways and not being disclosing. So it was essentially robbed unaware customers of so many millions and millions of miles over the years. I don't defend it, but it did seem like if it would have made sense to keep some function of that. But I guess it just maybe it was either not desirable or just not possible in all the other things they did to break. I mean, now their engine has gotten so bad that even booking in February, I was just trying to book very straightforward Air France, Dar es Salaam to Paris to Seattle. I mean, published fare, no extra connections. I mean, the most direct way to get back to Seattle. And I talked to Tiffany at 1 mile at a time, and she did all this stuff about how Amadeus or whatever that Air France uses, and the way Delta doesn't program it means it just had become truly just impossible to issue the ticket. Not that it was costing 1 million miles, but it was, you could only, if Delta had done a certain type of route in a few cities like Johannesburg, you could still ticket. But I mean, it gotten to that point that even a connecting flight on a main partner straightforward was not even bookable.
Well, I mean, the one thing that people forget is that at the end of the day, all these systems that these airlines are running on are 30-plus-year-old systems, right? So they're very limited in what they can do. They're very constrained, and no one has really invested in trying to displace them, because it is a very disruptive process. There's no doubt, but there's also nothing that's really great out there.
Well, NWA.com, 15 years ago, I could redeem for China Southern Ashgabat to Beijing, via Novosibirsk with one search online. It worked perfectly for their entire partner lineup. So that was the best partner booking experience I've had. And nobody, I guess AA is slowly adding some, and United's had a lot, but taking steps backward with all their recent stuff. But
like you, I think the best experience was, Northwest, and then on my side was Continental, right? Their goal was always to get all the partners online as quickly as possible. Everything was straightforward. And back then, if you could find that, you could do multi-city and would do end-to-end pricing. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing experience. Mm-hmm. But it was really because the Northwest and Continental, that's where they decided. There was two schools of thought right back then. One was, give the customers as much direct access for self-service. It gets us out of the way. It gives them what they want. Or then the other aspect, which the other three really took, was make it as hard as possible, because at the end of the day, the thing that costs most from a partner program, from a frequent flyer program, is the partner flights, right? So we want to keep them on our metal. Why do you think American and United for the longest time would only show you their own metal for rewards? Mm-hmm. Right, because it was cheaper for them. There was really no cost to it.
Is it really that much cheaper? Because I've always seen these rumors that the compensation rates are incredibly low for these partner flights, and that the theories like why Avianca life miles can exist. Essentially the airline doesn't need to exist because the program is just selling discounted Star Alliance flights.
So there's two aspects to it, right? The negotiated rates are definitely much cheaper than anything we would see, but when you put someone on your own metal, the cost is zero, right? It's either zero or close to zero, because you don't have to pay anyone. There's no outgoing cash. Now, back in the day of StarNet blocking on United, the whole reason that came to be was because there was an imbalance with the number of United members booking for Star Alliance flights versus vice versa.
Mhm.
Because the goal is always keep your transactions to as close to net zero as possible. So I have a passenger that flew 5,000 miles on you, and you have a passenger that flew 5,000 miles on me. So it's a net zero cost. And that's part of why we see these redemption rates change, because there's an particularly when you look at a specific market, it's often because there's an imbalance with how much traffic is going on the partner versus on the issuing carrier.
There isn't a lot of demand, say, out of Japan for United instead of ANA, or these.
Exactly. If you want to go to the States or Guam, great, but where else are you going to go, right?
And as a frequent flyer and more of a road warrior in the past, I was frustrated when I took up the United program of how many partners on any kind of ticket other than even some of the business class fares the earn would be just so low that I just couldn't justify booking it. And United seemed especially poor, especially with a lot of the Asian carriers. So it was just a frustration, but that leads to the movement in the past few years has seemed to be these alliances and these non-alliance partnerships and investments and things like Delta investing in these airlines. The Etihad experiment didn't go so well a few years ago, but I'm wondering again. We have no real idea how these things are going to shake out. But is it seeming that there's a new life for the alliances, that not getting financially entangled with partners but having some access might be a product of this period?
I mean, definitely what we're seeing now, right? Delta is taking a much harder financial hit because of the approach they took to move away from the alliances and go with these one-off joint ventures and invest in these airlines, because now they're having to take all these write-offs because of all this investment. So it's a trade-off, right? They had more control that way, but they were also more exposed, and they're now seeing the brunt of that, which they couldn't have one would say they couldn't have planned, but at the same time, anyone who's watched this industry knows it's a very cyclical industry.
Mm-hmm.
And, as long as you're going up, at some point you're going to come crashing down. Right. I've seen this at least 3 times in my own lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So you would hope that airline executives see that, but maybe not.
I guess it's like the investment managers in Australia that their whole working career they've had no recession, so it's like they wouldn't know what to do to invest if prices went down. So.
Yeah, but I mean, and it's one of the challenges, right? But I think is Delta probably reconsidering their approach? Quite possibly, right? I think the last quarter their loss was 4.6 billion, if I remember correctly. I mean, it was more than $1 billion more than United was or American was, and it was mostly tied to the write-offs they had to take.
Maybe it's the stickiness of perception or the effectiveness of communication. I've not been paying a lot of attention, and I'm biased towards thinking Delta is a good experience. And what's permeated to me the past 5-6 months is that if I had to fly a U.S. airline, it would be Delta first, JetBlue second, and I don't really have an idea on Southwest, and I have no confidence in American or United, and Alaska don't really have a sense of it, even though I'm based in Seattle. Again, I've become a low information consumer in the political sense. But where are you in terms of if you had to fly? Where are you stacking the airlines, and how you would arrange it for feeling comfortable and safe with the situation, or are you indifferent?
Well, my approach to airlines has been the same approach to cell phone companies. They all suck. You just have to find the one that sucks the least for you. And what sucks least for me might not be what sucks least for you. For me, I mean, United would be my go-to for a combination of reasons. One, Newark. I live in New Jersey. Newark is easy. 2, I mean, I do have my lifetime 1K status, so that does go somewhere with them. So particularly in things like irregular operations, right? I know I'll eventually get home, and that's what you want. Like at the end of the day, when you're somewhere else, you just want to know that you're gonna get home and not get stuck, and that's a pretty good feeling. But beyond that, right? Those are really the 2 fundamental reasons why I would pick United. Do I think they have a better onboard product? I mean, I think everyone does something better than someone else. they can't do everything great. I do love United Polaris. Who knows what it'll be after all this falls out, right? I haven't been in Polaris for 6 months now. And I do think that was probably the best business class product we had stateside out of the big three. But again, nothing's going to be the same moving forward, and who knows when it'll go back, if it goes back, right? There's a lot of money that airlines need to save, so they're going to trim a lot of the things they were giving out before. Beyond that, it really depends on where I need to go and who I can get there on, right? I don't have a problem with Delta. My only beef with Delta is they have a lot of arrogance amongst them.
No,
and you can see it when you interact with people. American, I found you either get really good people or really bad people. And it really often has to do with them, whether it's Legacy American or Legacy US Air. Legacy US Air folk are just not happy in life, in my experience.
And uniforms do something. I mean, when Delta rolled out, and I know there's been some issues with allergies and different things, when they rolled out the purple uniforms, I mean, there was a real extra bounce in the step of employees across the board, it seems. I mean, they, men, women, I mean, all different groups, all the different outfits in that. It seemed like they had an extra new pride that seemed like the uniforms actually mean something.
I mean, there's something to be said about, and we've talked about this on the podcast, right? There's something to be said about the leadership of the company, right? There is no doubt that Delta CEO paints a very different picture and a very different outcome and treats his staff very differently than, say, Doug Parker. Like, occasionally I'll listen to the investor calls, right? You hear on Delta's call, confidence, like the tone is confident, even if the outlook isn't, right? They can speak with authority. You just feel it in their voice. You get on an American call and it's just like there's nervousness, there's lack of confidence. It's like, can you really trust what this person is saying? And you have to imagine, like, if that's what's happening to the investor community, well, imagine what type of communication is going on internally. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why Doug Parker is struggling, is because people just don't have faith in him, because he doesn't come off as confident. Right. And we saw this with Kirby for a while, too. And Kirby's been getting better at it. But Kirby did not elude confidence when you heard it.
I only see it from the griping on Flyer Talk and that, but it seemed like for a period of 2 years, one man was single-handedly destroying two of major U.S. airlines at the same time.
I mean, if you ever have the time, I highly recommend listening to the quarterly calls, because you'll just hear it and you just, one gives you some confidence as to you can believe what they're saying, some don't.
You did not mention coronavirus measures at all. Are they all the same to you? Or is there, for the nervous flyer that wants to have, is, however you measure it, is, if that's the major deciding factor, I'm thinking about coronavirus, nothing else of the flight experience. Are the airlines the same, or we see a lot of spin?
I mean, Delta's doing a much better job, and I think JetBlue, about blocking middle seats. At the end of the day, my take on this is, if you're willing to get on a plane, it shouldn't be any difference, because the reality is, a person 1 seat away from you is not 6 feet, and you're probably much closer to the person in front of you or the one behind you. Right? If you are truly, genuinely concerned about it, it's not the time to get on a plane.
Yeah, buying the row in front, the row behind, the row with you.
But at the end of the day, right, it's a confined space, right? There's only so much air that's going to circulate. I don't remember, but at some point there was a number that was only like 10 to 15% of fresh air is brought into the cabin at any given time. So even if they're running through filtration, right, they've got filters. You have to just wonder, you're breathing in the same air over and over for the bulk of the flight.
Now, what do you actually do for a living? I know it's something IT related.
I am in software sales. So I'm a field technical director. So I'm a technical expert for a software company that does storage management. And
so I'm curious, somebody like you've had one-on-one interactions with United and different people. People listen to your podcast. Are you all on the payroll of airlines advising them, or are airlines so clueless that they don't hire people? Because I feel like, why if you're not, why are you not consulting for these guys, or why are they not calling up Seth or Steven or all these? Because it seems like when I've met airline employees, they almost resist interacting with the people who are so obsessed they know more about the subject than the employees themselves.
I have never been paid by an airline, so I'll put that out there right now. I mean, a lot of it is fear-based, right? People who feel intimidated, like the people you're talking about who don't want to talk to people who know more, it's because they feel intimidated. But I mentioned some of the folks from Continental; they will gladly sit down and talk to you because they're not afraid of you, and they realize that like they're not afraid of hearing from other people or being usurped, right? And I've also talked to airline folks who are clearly in a place of fear, and you start talking to them and they don't want to talk to you anymore because they get scared. Why? I don't know. Right? That's their own little psyche issue. But sometimes the airlines don't want to hear. The airlines are really good at finding people to validate what they want to validate. Right? And like most people, right? You always want to validate your own opinion. And airlines are no different. They'll find people, they want to go a particular direction, right? Frequent flyer changes are an example, right? If you look at the last batch of United changes and you probably go ask a bunch of GS folks, they're like, yeah, this is great, right? That's a very small percentage of your population. But if you interview 50 GSs and 10 non-GSs and 50 of them say, we love this, they're going to say, well, this was asked by you, right? And then they can just spin however they want. And that's unfortunate. That's what it is. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to these programs in the next 18 months, because now these people they've coddled for the last 18 to 36 months, in a hyper fashion, they're not there right now.
And they aren't going to be back next year, I don't think. They're not the ones coming back.
No, business travel has changed for quite a bit right now, and the airlines
it'll be the CEO who still wants to go out and kick the tires around the world and get away with it, but then the CEO won't sign off on anybody else traveling because they don't want to deal with the liability, and they don't care if the other person enjoys travel. So you've got one traveler left instead of 30 or 40.
But how many of those CEOs are actually flying commercial? Right, most of them are not. And that's what you really have to wonder is, like, will the airlines rethink these invitation only programs and the rest of the program to rebalance the new reality, or are they going to try to keep holding on to this the experience they've had over the last few years and learn the hard way?
That's a great point. It's not the CEO they're after. It's the regional sales VP that actually is the global services customer. And to that end, I feel like if a flyer, a customer drew up what they think an airline's organization chart, they would be shocked that the frequent flyer program head is like 4 levels down in a marketing department from the CEO. And I think if a customer drew it up, the frequent flyer program would be like one of the pillars reporting to the CEO. Why is that disconnect with how airlines see it? Or how customers see it?
I mean, because at the end of the day, frequent flyer programs are still considered loyalty programs, which is considered marketing, right? So that's why it falls where it does. In some cases, we've seen airlines spin the programs out to have their own management. Aeroplan was a good example, but that's now getting reversed. But again, Aeroplan's now under the VP of Sales and Marketing. And it's just because that's where the loyalty organization falls. And I'm sure internally, right, every VP wants it under them because it's such a profitable part of the business. So who knows what internal battles happen to be able to control that.
And we'll close with slang, so we can, or acronyms or lingo that we can sound like we know what we're talking about. So I know you have to refer to the onboard product instead of like the business class or the economy class. It's all about the hard product, soft product. I hear you talk about frames. How do we use frames in discussing aircraft? Because I don't think I've ever heard you say like this plane or whatever. It's like this frame or that.
Well, I mean, frames is just the model of the plane, right? So or it can be a particular plane as well. But a frame is really nothing than the physical asset of the plane. So you could 757. You could have a 757 frame, or you could say I flew on frame, blah blah blah. If you know the tail number, or the ship number, right? Some airlines don't. The tail number doesn't match the ship number, and they have two different codes. But most of your if you're talking to an airline employee, only your pilots and Uber geeks will really get that, right? Most people will still refer to it as the plane type. Um, I think it's probably just because I've gotten used to saying it that I'll say it that way.
What's some other Uber geek lingo that we can pick up then? like
I don't even know.
Post the other day about some landing in Amsterdam, and he said, "Oh, it sounds like it, or it looks like it was flaring or something." And half of the comments were about, "What is flaring? This isn't flaring," or something like that. And it sounded cool in the article, and he never defined why it is what it is, why it qualified.
Well, I mean, you've got your basic aeronautical terms like VFR, visual flight rules, or IFR, instrument flight rules, right? If you're reading things like crash synopsis, or if you're reading AV Herald or things like that, you'll see that kind of vernacular. And that's really just the type of how it was being flown. Visual means it's being flown by eyesight. Instrument means it's being flown by instruments guiding you. So landings are a great example, right? You could either have a visual landing or an instrument landing. And visual means the pilot's landing it by watching it. Instrument landings, it's programmed into the computer to do it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're all the wiser. We've gotten such a knowledge. I won't call it dump. That sounds bad. A knowledge cascade. A knowledge cascade from Fozz Mahmud. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for